You may have noticed that the lines I skied all had negative slopes. While this may seem like a coincidence, it actually makes perfect mathematical sense. All lines with negative slopes share an important characteristic. That is, they all slant downhill as you read them from left to right. You see, the slope of the line is not just a random number. The slope of the line is a specific number that tells you something about the direction of a line and how steep the line will be. My friend Randy is an excellent skier, and I've asked him to join us today to help me show you all the different ways that a line can look, and to help me explain how the value for the slope of a line can tell you a lot about how a line will look on a graph. Lines can be classified in 4 ways. As you read from left to right, they can go downhill, or reading from left to right, they can go uphill. Lines can also be horizontal, and lines can be vertical. And the value for the slope of a line can be negative, positive, 0, or undefined. The direction of the line and the value for the slope of that line are related. If you know the value of the slope of a line, you'll know what direction the line goes. And if you know the direction that a line goes, you'll know something about the value of its slope. For example, lines that go downhill always have negative slopes. This is because on a downhill line, if you draw a slope triangle from one point to another, your rise will always be negative, and your run will always be positive. Therefore, the slope, or ratio of rise to run, will always be negative, since a negative number divided by a positive number is always negative. Lines that go uphill always have positive slopes. This is because on an uphill line, if you draw a slope triangle from one point to another, your rise will always be positive, and your run will always be positive. Therefore, the slope, or ratio of rise to run, will always be positive, since a positive number divided by a positive number is always positive. The slope of a horizontal line is 0. This is because on a horizontal line, you cannot draw a slope triangle. To get from one point to the other, you do not rise at all, so your rise will be 0. And since you can move horizontally in either direction to get from one point to another, your run can be either a positive or a negative number. So the slope will always be 0, since 0 divided by any non-zero number, positive or negative, is always 0. The slope of a vertical line is undefined. This is because on a vertical line, it's impossible to draw a slope triangle. Vertically, to get from one point to another, you can move either up or down. So your rise can be either a positive or a negative number. But since the points are right on top of each other, you can't move horizontally in either direction. So your run must be 0. The slope, or ratio of rise to run, will be undefined, since any number divided by 0 is undefined. You can't have 0 in the denominator. Because the slope of a vertical line is undefined, we often say that it has no slope. Here are a few tricks to help you remember which is which. Think of a skier skiing on a graph. A skier on a line that slopes down from left to right skis downhill. If you think of down as negative, you can remember that lines that go downhill have negative slopes. A skier on a line that slopes upward from left to right goes uphill. If you think of up as positive, you can remember that lines that go uphill have positive slopes. If a skier is on a horizontal line, he can't go up or down. A skier on a flat surface like this would have 0 problem. Think of this to remember that the slope of a horizontal line is 0. It's impossible for a skier to ski on a vertical line. It's so steep that we say it has no slope. This image might help you remember that the slope of a vertical line is undefined. Think you've got it down? There are lines all over the place. Check out these lines on the Bay Bridge. As you see each one, try to classify its slope as positive, negative, 0, or undefined. So, the slope can tell you something about the direction of a line.
Slope can also tell you how steep a line actually is.
A horizontal line has a slope of 0. Lines that have slopes that are close to 0 end up looking almost horizontal on a graph.
Lines with slopes that are farther away from 0 will graph as much steeper lines.
Take a look at this. Here's a graph with a horizontal line. Its slope is 0. If we draw in more lines with different slopes, you'll see that the lines with more gradual slopes, those that are closer to horizontal, have slope values that are closer to 0. Likewise, the steeper lines have slopes that are farther away from 0.
The same is true of lines with negative slopes. The lines with gradual slopes, the ones that are closer to horizontal, have slope values that are closer to 0, and the steeper the lines get, the farther away from 0 their slopes are.
To sum it up, the value for the slope of a line can tell you how steep it is.
The farther away from 0, the steeper the slope.
Another way of saying that is, the higher the absolute value of the slope, the steeper the line will be.
So what does all of this have to do with skiing?
Well, there's many different routes that you can take down any one ski run.
Advanced skiers who often like speed and a challenge will sometimes pick a line that has a much steeper slope.
And less advanced skiers who like to play it safe often look for a way down the hill with a more gradual slope. When we're done, we'll do the math and find the slopes of both lines to see if you were right. Ready?
Who will ski the line with the steeper slope? Who skied the line with the steeper slope? Was it Pam or was it Randy?
It looks like I skied the line with the steeper slope. But let's check the math out, just to be sure. Remember, the line whose slope has the greatest absolute value is the steeper line. Placing a grid over the lines, we can find the slopes. We'll mark 2 points on each line. Now, we'll draw slope triangles and compute the change in y and the change in x to find the slope. First, let's take a look at my line. My line goes down 1 space for a rise of -1, and over 1 space for a run of 1. That gives my line an overall slope of -1 over 1, which is just -1. Now let's look at Randy's line. Randy's line goes down 1 space for a rise of -1 and over 2 spaces for a run of 2. That gives his line an overall slope of -1 over 2, or -1/2. So how can we use these numbers to prove whose line is steeper? Remember, the greater the absolute value the slope of the line is, the steeper the line will be. My line has a slope of -1. The absolute value of -1 is 1. Randy's line has a slope of -1/2. The absolute value of -1/2 is 1/2. Since 1 is greater than 1/2, and steeper lines have slopes with greater absolute values, we've mathematically shown that I ski the line with the steeper slope. Okay, enough